So for us, it's a pretty straightforward situation that we want to get that rectified, and we are determined to do so. So I think it is reasonable for anybody to take the view that we have said that there will be changes, because there has to be. The current status quo is not sustainable.
Okay. You mentioned the sort of trade increases, for want of a better phrase, that need attention. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But could I ask you to confirm something which Lord Frost told us last week when he kindly came to give evidence? And he said, and I quote, "The protocol is 100% clear that nothing in it affects the territorial integrity or state responsibilities of the United Kingdom." You'll be aware that a number of people have, I suppose, conflated potential constitutional change and the trading arrangements as set out in the protocol. And we've heard a very strong voice from witnesses from the loyalist communities who said that they want to hear it very loud and clear from as many government ministers as possible that the integrity of the UK remains intact with the protocol, and the only way to change the constitutional settlement is a border poll as set out in the Good Friday Agreement. Could you confirm that you agree with Lord Frost's assessment, and also the fact that the constitutional settlement of the UK could only be changed through a border poll vis-a-vis Northern Ireland?
Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely correct. And also, one of the things the Prime Minister was able to secure as part of the negotiations that he and Lord Frost did over the last couple of years since he became Prime Minister is he got back in the consent mechanism for the protocol itself. I appreciate that's in 2024, but that's quite an important factor as well. And it's one of the reasons why I've made the point both to Parliament, but also widely in meetings with the EU Commission, and I've referred to this with Mal Sheffield, the Vice President, is in both parties' interests. If the EU wants to see the protocol delivering in a way that's sustainable, then it needs to be delivering in a way that means it's able to be successful in that consent vote in 2024. And I think, personally, it's just a personal view, at the moment, it's very questionable whether it's going to be sustainable in its current format. And I think that's why it's in, as I say, everybody's interest to see it rectified so that it's going to have a life beyond that consent mechanism. It's only going to do that if it's working for people in Northern Ireland and respecting the integrity of the UK single market. Okay,
thank you. You have a meeting later this week with counterparts from Dublin, and that's a welcome meeting that's taking place. What are you hoping to get out of that?
Well, it's a BIIGC meeting. I'll be joint co-chairing with Simon Coveney.
Yes.
I think it is. I'm looking forward to it, actually. It's actually tomorrow. I think they're good meetings because it's a chance to show that we're working together, which we do. As I say, through all of this period, despite some of the occasional coverage, actually, for example, Simon Coveney and myself have had regular conversations all through the last year or so, particularly with COVID, as well as doing joint meetings with the Northern Ireland executive ministers as well. And indeed with the Taoiseach, both myself, I met the Taoiseach just a couple of weeks ago, the Prime Minister and the Taoiseach speak and meet pretty regularly because we do work together as partners. And there's a range of issues around COVID, obviously, as we move through the vaccination programme, and hopefully as we're all moving out of COVID to just be able to work together and ensure we are. And it builds on the work that was done at the BIC, the British Irish Council, which we all attended in Fermanagh just a couple of weeks ago, 10 days ago now.
Secretary, you'll be aware that tail end of last week, a statement was put out by the Loyalist Communities Council, threatening and thuggish in tone, that ministers from Dublin were not welcome in Northern Ireland. You know as well as I do the importance of trust and bilateral friendships and relationships. For the record, could you respond both to that statement and also confirm or deny whether or not ministers of the Irish government are welcome in Northern Ireland?
Ministers from the Republic of Ireland and actually ministers from pretty much most countries in the world are always going to be welcome in Northern Ireland. It's important for Northern Ireland. I think so. And actually one of the things I want to be driving and talking about in the centenary year is the global opportunities for inward investment into Northern Ireland and what Northern Ireland has to offer the world. It's actually why Northern Ireland, I think, is such an important part of the United Kingdom, and why it makes the United Kingdom stronger, because of its global outreach and global ability. So having ministers coming in, I think is a good thing. Obviously, we are co-guarantors of not just the Good Friday Belfast Agreement with the Irish government, but the New Decade New Approach Agreement. We work together on a range of issues and always do. We're always, as I say, in contact on issues that affect both. Obviously, Northern Ireland is an integral part of the United Kingdom. It comes under the United Kingdom government. But Northern Ireland, as I say, through the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and New Decade New Approach, among other issues, we have a very strong working relationship with the Irish government, and we will continue to do so. And Irish ministers are always very welcome to visit any part of the UK, including Northern Ireland. And we look forward to continuing that relationship as we go forward. And look, in terms of the LCC, my view's always been, and I'm, as I say, I feel like it's right to be quite robust around this, because, I mean, a number of us have met with, and I know the committee met with the LCC a few weeks ago. I've met with some members of the LCC, as have my officials and other parts of Northern Ireland representatives. And, you know, those people are the people I think we should all be engaging with, people who are clearly arguing to continue to have a peaceful future for Northern Ireland and to move away from violence. I think that is the right thing. If we don't engage with people in that position, if we hadn't have done many years ago, my predecessors, all of our predecessors, we wouldn't have had the Good Friday Belfast Agreement in the first place. But we also need to be very, very clear, and I'm very much of this view, whether it's the LCC or anybody else, that for that kind of engagement to be productive, positive, and moving forward, continuing, they've got to be very clear about the fact that they support peaceful, democratic, diplomatic processes and want to move that way, because that's the basis on which we engage and move forward. It's the basis on which Northern Ireland has seen the last 23 years or so of prosperity and growth and the peace process delivering, and it's the basis on which the future will be growing positively, hopefully, as well. So I think anybody who uses any kind of threat is unfortunate. I'm not going to get into the detail of individuals, because we've seen various comments that can be interpreted by various people in different ways over the last few years. I don't think it's particularly helpful to give our own commentary on that, but I do think we've got to be very clear that moving forward, it's got to be about peaceful ways of working through diplomacy, through democracy, and through the elected representatives. And that's the right way to move forward. And we do that together with all our partners and industry friends around the world. And obviously, the US has always had a very keen interest, and I'm very keen to encourage that. That's why we've appointed a special envoy, particularly with a view to seeing more investment in Northern Ireland.
We'll come on to him in a moment, but just to close this one out, it's a bit more than unfortunate, isn't it? It's downright unhelpful, disruptive, threatening, and has no place in the politics of Northern Ireland in the 21st century. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Well, I think anybody sort of inferring or arguing around violence, yes, that is absolutely the case. I agree with that. I don't want to get too much into it, because obviously people will draw comparisons to what politicians in the Republic of Ireland have done over the last years, which could arguably seem to be unhelpful. I think we've all got to focus on moving forward in the future. Thank
you. You mentioned, Mr. Ringland, your envoy, and I, from a personal point of view, I certainly welcome this initiative, Secretary of State. I think it's an interesting one. We're trying to get a session before the House rises with Mr. Ringland to find out his views and ambitions and vision for this role. Just for the purpose of this morning, could you just sort of set out for the committee why you thought now to appoint, and what you hope Mr. Ringland will bring to this role and relationships with the US?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's something we've been working on for a while. There's no particular, I mean, the reason now is just that we've gone through the processes and made a decision and got agreement to do it. So it was right to announce it as early as possible. I was keen to announce before the summer, so that Trevor's got a period of time to get himself into the role and to organise, obviously, to get over to the US. And it is important. And the whole point of his role is for him to be able to spend time in the United States. Look, I'm very keen, as I say, and the core purpose of the role is to further develop and grow those relationships in the United States. For us as UK government, supporting and working with our with colleagues in Northern Ireland. Obviously, we've got the Bureau and Invest NI as well, who do fantastic work, actually. And it's just having somebody extra who can be speaking for and with UK government in the US, particularly at a time where, as we're coming out of COVID, there's going to be some really good opportunities in advanced engineering, manufacturing, cyber, to name but a few, We've already got the US's, I think, largest insurance company with their software cyber base effectively already in Belfast. I want to see that grow. I want to see more companies looking at doing that because Belfast is, I think, has got the best, arguably, in the world between the private sector and Queen's and the public sector. And I just think having somebody who can spend that bit of time, a few times a year, getting out to the US, building those relationships, not just in Washington, because obviously that's primarily the job of the embassy, who do a very good job on that for us, and myself when I'm there, but around other parts of the US where, whether it's Silicon Valley, LA, New York, Boston, where we've got diaspora, but also businesses who could be looking to invest in Northern Ireland. I just think I want to make sure we're taking every opportunity to promote, develop, and to be frank, capitalise on that for the benefit of business and the economy of Northern Ireland.
Thank you. You mentioned jobs and investment there, and you mentioned, sort of some of the sort of high worth sectors, the sort of professional white collar jobs, if I may. We've been hearing evidence, and I know you're alert to this, of the perception that the prosperity agenda of the Good Friday Agreement, the second side of the coin, first side being peace, hasn't trickled through and permeated all sections of Northern Ireland society. And it's easy, it's not easy, but the accountancy firms, the AI, the farmer, etc. Will you be paying now special attention to try and address that legitimate concern of looking to the full range of jobs, so that all communities, irrespective of socioeconomic background, will be able to feel the benefits of Good Friday, trade, investment, and the peace confidence dividend?
Yes. And I think that is a very important point, and that's actually where the manufacturing, engineering, but also wider opportunities, I think, are important. And I think it is a fair point and a fair critique of the last period since the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, that in parts of Northern Ireland, particularly around Derry, Londonderry, and parts of Belfast, there are communities who do feel they've been left behind, and we absolutely have to recognise that. We've got to do some work with the executive, obviously on the economy side, with our city and growth deals, with social fabric work we're looking at through the New Deal funding, around what can we do to help drive those areas. I'm particularly, I've got to say, interested in social enterprise, which I think potentially has a very large part to play. We've got social enterprise organisations, businesses in Northern Ireland doing some very, very good work. And I think we can look at that and learn from them and help them grow in how we do level up and find some of those areas where jobs have moved out, moved into different types of jobs, as you say, Chairman, how we can help people in those areas see that they do have opportunity, that there is ambition, there is growth and opportunity in Northern Ireland that's for the benefit of all, and actually make it real and look at what will actually make a difference on the ground to help people really see that levelling up is something that means something and delivers for everybody, regardless of where you live or what your background. If you want to put the work in, you want to get on, we should be supporting you to do so.
Sure. And now you mentioned areas there where there's an awful lot of devolved competence. What scope do you envisage to help you deliver on some of that as a UK government minister contained within the Internal Markets Act?
Well, I think there's a few areas. I mean, first and foremost, it is about working with the executive. Through the New Deal, we've already announced some money, for example, that's going to the Department for the Economy around skills, that they can invest in skills from the New Deal, the NIO's New Deal money. So it's working with them around that kind of thing that can be delivered on through the executive. Obviously, as we move forward, the UK SPF fund, the Levelling Up fund, the community fund that are being run by the Department for Communities and Local Government, there are opportunities there to look at how we can help support and encourage some of that funding to ensure that it is focused on the areas where we can see a need to develop and grow and create opportunity. Again, I say working with the executive, because the executive is there on the ground, has that clear ability to connect, and is working with communities and companies and individuals every single day. So I think it is a partnership issue, but I think it is right that we as UK government, as we are across the whole of the United Kingdom, are very clear with people that we want to see levelling up be something that people actually benefit from and can see real tangible progress in their areas.
Thank you, Secretary. That's an encouraging answer, and we'll obviously follow initiatives that you bring forward with close interest. We're now going to go back. We're going to deal with this morning sort of thematically. Mine was sort of more scattergun, I suppose. I'm going to turn to Gregory Campbell, and then to Mr. Paisley, and then to Mr. Farry, and Miss Hannah, all of whom have protocol-related questions. But let's start with Gregory Campbell first. Gregory?
Thank you, Chairman, and very welcome, Secretary of State, again in front of the committee. Good to see you. On the issue of the protocol, I suppose many people are looking at it in very binary terms, and you've seen some of the protests and objections in loyalist communities over the past few weeks. There are a number of people who've put it to me that the government, in terms of the protocol, if we look at the protocol, it was a two-way arrangement between the EU and the UK, which has ramifications for everybody in Northern Ireland and many people beyond. That there are many people who've said to me that NDNA is a bit like that, in that that was an arrangement between various parties, which has been undermined because of Sinn Féin's attitude to it, repeatedly talking about it as an Irish Language Act, in a similar way to the way you and other government ministers have said that the protocol has been undermined because of attitudes by the EU towards it. Do you see the similarity and the symmetry between those two positions?
No, well, actually, good morning, Mr. Campbell. Thank you for the welcome, as it were. I'm afraid, no, I don't agree with that, actually. I think they are different things. So I think New Decade, New Approach, the whole principle behind that, after 3 years of no devolved government, was the parties came together, came to agreement on a range of things. I do agree with you that the presentation of some issues by some parties is, I would say, interesting. The reality of the package, as I said, yes, is a cultural package that was agreed between the parties, rather than any one party. It's a balanced package. It was, as I say, agreed between particularly yourselves and as the DUP and Sinn Féin, but agreed by the parties in New Decade, New Approach. The challenge with the protocol is, I think, with the protocol is around how it's being interpreted and the interpretation that's being required by the EU. So if you look back to our command paper last year, which was pretty warmly and positively received, that looked forward to a pragmatic, flexible approach to how you're going to implement the protocol. What we've seen in practice with the protocol and the way that it's being applied at the moment is that it is, I would argue, breach of itself. As I said in my opening remarks, the protocol itself refers to the integrity of the UK internal market. It refers to not disrupting the everyday lives of people in their communities, and the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And I certainly would argue the first two, and I think it's becoming stronger in terms of the East-West strand to make the argument on the third part of that as well. So I do think the things are different, but obviously I appreciate everybody's entitled to their own opinion.
Yeah, but do you accept and understand that, for example, the protocol was an attempted arrangement in a very delicate and finely balanced position in Northern Ireland vis-a-vis trading and constitutional position? And the government's position has repeatedly been that the EU have undermined much of that because of the way they have demanded it be implemented. And if you do accept that, and you've said it several times, as has the Prime Minister and Lord Scott, do you not understand then that many unionists see that Sinn Féin's attitude towards NDNA, which has been repeatedly to state that it is an Irish Language Act, when we all know that it isn't, but if they keep repeatedly saying that, in the knowledge that that will undermine confidence in my community towards NDNA, it undermines the basis of that agreement in much the same way as the protocol has been undermined by the EU's attitude. Can you see that, even if you don't agree with it?
No.
Can you see how people would look at it in that light?
I understand. I do understand the point you're making, and I can understand very much the point you're making. The reason I disagree with you on this, I think there are two there's a very fundamental difference. One is about perception and presentation, and you are absolutely right. This is a cultural package. We should all be very clear about it's a balanced cultural package. It's one that the two parties agreed. And in practice, what's being asked to be delivered, and if it ends up being UK government, what we would deliver is the balanced cultural package that was agreed between the parties. So in practice, what would happen if the executive takes this forward, or UK government, is what everybody agreed. The difference with the protocol is, in practice on the ground, it is having an impact that was not envisaged, not outlined, and is detrimentally affecting everybody's lives. In its practical implementation on the ground, that is quite different to a presentation issue where we all have a part to play, yourself, myself, all of us, to make sure we are clear about the presentational reality, which is that it's a cultural package.
Okay, we'll agree to disagree on that, Secretary of State. Back to you, Chair.
No, that's great.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Mr. Paisley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And can I declare that I have registered interests and that I'm involved in a commercial legal action against the government on the protocol.
Forgive me, Ian, that's my fault, not yours. I should have asked at the start of the meeting and I forgot, not for the first time, so my apologies. Your declaration is noted. Thank you.
No problem. Secretary of State, there appears to be two problems, two seismic problems on the protocol. Number one is the position that unionists are of the view, and it's been expressed to this committee, that the protocol has undermined in some way the constitutional standing and position of Northern Ireland. Now, that wasn't helped by the action and by the statements that were made in a court case about Northern Ireland's position and the Act of Union and Northern Ireland's status within that. How, on that particular problem, how is the government going to rewind what was said in court and retrieve a position? Is there an opportunity for the government to make a very precise statement about the exact constitutional status of Northern Ireland? I mean, the fact that one of our European partners doesn't even understand that Northern Ireland is part of the Union just is grist to the mill in this type of situation. So what opportunity is the government going to take to rewind that position and firmly set out Northern Ireland's constitutional position to reassure unionists at this time?
Sure. Well, I'm sure you'll appreciate, Mr. Paisley, that there is a court case going forward, but I do appreciate this is a matter of public interest. But as I say, because it's been considered by a court, I don't think it's helpful or appropriate actually for me to comment in any substantive way. But I do look, there are a lot of complex arguments. I'm not going to attempt to summarise or comment on them while the court is considering its judgment. But I do appreciate the point you made. I know that the PM was asked about this in PMQs. It was one of the issues in the case, although without reference to the particular case itself being made. And I'm happy to confirm, as he did on the floor of the House, that a central proposition of our case is that the Northern Ireland Protocol is consistent with the Act of Union. And with the greatest respect, I don't think it's right for me, as I say, to elaborate why this court case any further than that. But as I said earlier on in, I think, response to a question from the chairman, the constitutional position of Northern Ireland can only change at the behest of the people of Northern Ireland.
Yeah, but I accept that. I don't want to get you into something that is sub judice. I think that would be wrong and improper, and I accept what you're saying on that, Secretary of State. But do you accept that the outcome of all of this means that the government is going to have to try and find an opportunity to reaffirm and reassure unionists and loyalists who perceive, and perception is reality in a lot of this, who perceive that the constitutional status of Northern Ireland has in some way been damaged, undermined, and that they will require a reassuring arm from the government about that? I mean, do you accept that you'll need to find an opportunity to do that at the highest possible level, especially when we have this clamour that Northern Ireland isn't even part of the United Kingdom?
Well, I think the Prime Minister has been very clear. I've been clear, and he will. And you're right. Both the Prime Minister and myself will continue to be very clear and make the point that Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. It's an integral part of the United Kingdom. Anybody who makes an argument otherwise is reinforcing the point that I think some people, mainly outside of the knowledge of people like ourselves on the committee, but people outside of the UK sometimes do not always understand the structure of the United Kingdom or the nuances and complexities and sensitivities of Northern Ireland. I think that is a very fair point. But our position as Northern Ireland is an integral part of the United Kingdom. It's right that it is so. We want to protect that. And as I've said before, I want to continue to deliver on that, because I think the United Kingdom would be not just smaller, but would be weaker economically and culturally if Northern Ireland wasn't part of it. Because Northern Ireland, I think, is a very important part of the UK in terms of what it brings to the UK as a thriving, exciting, entrepreneurial, full of culture part of the UK.
Thank you. Now, the second problem, I said there was two seismic problems. The other problem is, of course, the impact that the protocol is having on trade. And that's not perception at all. That is definitely reality. And I wonder how you respond to the Economy Minister's assessment, where the department now seems to have moved from a position that they're looking for something positive in the protocol and something that we may be able to build on, where they've now completely taken a very significant change, step change position, where they're saying that they have significant concerns about the distinct possibility that firms in GB will become dissuaded from engaging with Northern Ireland market when faced by regulatory barriers, which can only increase if policies in England, Scotland and Wales move in a direction where Northern Ireland's options are constrained by the protocol. He goes on to say that I am now concerned that the UK Internal Market Act does nothing to protect against commercial discrimination. I mean, these are very strong words by the Department of Economy in Northern Ireland, that businesses are now facing commercial discrimination. How do you react to that?
Well, I think it highlights exactly why the points that I and Lord Foster made around the sustainability of the protocol in the current format of how it's being implemented is a real issue, because we can't have a situation where consumers around the UK have access to different products because of consumer choice. There is a reality that a supermarket in my constituency in Great Yarmouth will have slightly different products to the supermarkets in any of our constituencies because they're driven by consumer choice. But it is consumer choice, it's not regulatory requirements. And we've got to get back to that situation where the products that are available in Northern Ireland, whether you're a business or a consumer, are the products that you've always been able to access freely and flexibly, and they're not unavailable because of anything other than consumer choice, if you like. So I actually have a lot of sympathy with that. One of the things I've heard consistently, as has Lord Foster, in the joint engagement meetings we've done with businesses as well as civic society, and actually in the meeting we had with Mayor Shevkovich just a couple of weeks ago, which we organised with both civil society, but a separate one with businesses across a range of sectors and the business representative organisations, has been consistently clear that there are problems with products moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland that need to be resolved, or the ability for Northern Ireland businesses to get products from GB businesses, either because of the direct challenges of the protocol, which we need to correct, or because of a perception of challenges. Either way, that is a problem, and it's a problem that absolutely has to be fixed. And why, as I say, I come back to the point I made in my opening remarks, which is, I think, backed up by the point you're making, Mr. Paisley, from the Department of Economy, which is the current situation is not sustainable. We are very clear that there needs to be a shift and a change to ensure that Northern Ireland can prosper and grow in the future as well.
But I think what you said there, Secretary, is very important. You said that you have significant sympathy with the view expressed by the Department of Employment, which is stated position now is that Northern Ireland companies are facing commercial discrimination. I mean, I don't think that should be lost on anyone as to why there's a requirement for significant changes. And I hope that those changes, which you're tempting us with and putting in front of us, that they are actually significant and they will not be tinkerings, but they will actually be changes that address this discrimination aspect.
Well, as I say, we're very clear that we want to ensure that products can flow. The protocol's got to work in a pragmatic way, a proportionate way. Obviously, we understand the EU's determination and focus of protecting their single market. We respect that. Products that are moving to the Republic of Ireland absolutely need to have to be dealt with correctly. But products that are moving to Northern Ireland from GB that are not moving to the Republic of Ireland, they're clearly not at risk. We've got to make sure we get a system that works, that is not creating the problems that's being created at the moment for both businesses and consumers. And I would argue, in and of itself, is actually breaching the protocol's requirements and the wording of the protocol itself.
And could that system, which you're talking about, of making sure that goods that are at risk, could they not all be checked either at point of sale or at the Dublin port, rather than being or the entry into the Republic of Ireland, rather than at the Belfast port?
Well, we do think, as I say, there's some pragmatic and flexible things we can do. We have put, I think, now more than a dozen papers over to the Commission around how we can deal with the protocol in a way that can work for everybody, deals with the concerns that the EU have got about their protection of the single market, ensures that we can continue to deliver on our main focus, which is the Good Friday Belfast Agreement and the prosperity of Northern Ireland and the peace process as well, and the integrity of the UK internal market. As I say, we put over about a dozen or more papers to the EU now. We're still waiting for full engagement in that, responses from the EU on those papers, I believe, at the moment. That's a matter for Lord Frost and his team they're taking forward. I do understand in a couple of areas, particularly medicines, the EU have talked about some proposals. I don't think we've yet seen the details of that. We know about that because of a tweet from an Irish journalist. So we're waiting to see that, Mal Sheffield was pretty clear on media a couple of weeks ago about wanting to be flexible and pragmatic and get things moving. We agree with that. We need to see that move from being words into action and actually seeing flexibility and pragmatism. And hopefully that's the work that Mal Sheffield's team will be taking forward with Lord Frost and his team.
Thank you, Secretary State.
Thank you, Ian. Secretary State, I just want to pick up on 2 points briefly that Mr. Paisley has raised. He spoke about the Minister for the Economy. There is an issue here, which is a process issue, but I just want to make sure it's on the radar. But it's not clear to us, and it's certainly not clear to the Minister for the Economy and their officials, how Stormont and Whitehall are going to share responsibility for monitoring and responding to changes in EU law under the protocol. This is an important point for businesses that want to stay within the rules. How is the government intending to approach this, and in what time frame?
Sure. I'm going to just bring in Colin Parry from the NIO is with us today.
Thank you. Good morning.
Yes. Economic and political issues. So I'm going to let Colin come in and just make sure he's got the mic.
Grateful. Thank you, Secretary.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So the issues around responding to changes in EU law is something that is, I think, shared across a range of places. So we have the joint consultative working group, which has been established under the protocol. That provides a forum for exchange of information and consultation between the UK and the EU at the top level. At an official level, obviously, myself, my team working for the Secretary of State will engage closely with the Cabinet Office. The Secretary of State talked about the officials working for Lord Frost. On that, they perform the secretariat function for the joint consultative working group. But we're also engaging actively with different parts of the Northern Ireland executive official system. In terms of individual areas of policy, those are delegated to the UK government department that is responsible for them. So DEFRA would be responsible for looking at EU law pertaining to agricultural goods. The NIO itself will deal with its responsibilities around Article 2 and the no diminution of rights, and we will look at the equality directives that are in that. And alongside that, we also work on common frameworks with a range of people across government and with the executive, and that allows us to kind of share information and to understand the way in which changes are happening, because UK government departments will retain clearly an interest in what is happening within the EU around areas in their sectors.
Okay, so it's on the radar, and I think we'll probably come back to this as probably a separate issue in due course. I just want to go back to another point, which was, I suppose, the elephant in the room, I suppose, that Mr. Paisley was talking about, and I raised in my earlier questions, Secretary of State, which was this impression from some of the community in Northern Ireland that the protocol represents a constitutional outrage, assault, call it what you will. That is a view, or that is a fire that has been fueled by a number of politicians in Northern Ireland who have been making that point. How can you, as the Secretary of State, convene those politicians and those political and community leaders to convince them that they are wrong and you and Lord Frost and the Prime Minister are right, and to convert them as ambassadors, if you will, with the message, an important message to carry into all sections of society, that the protocol is not a constitutional weapon?
Well, I agree with you that it's. I think it is about ensuring that people see this is not a constitutional, using your phrase, weapon, Chairman. Certainly, I don't see it as a. I feel I instinctively feel British. And I've spoken to people in Northern Ireland, and in Northern Ireland, obviously, people can feel anything from Northern Irish, they can feel British, they can feel a mixture of all of the above. That's part of the strength and the beauty of culture, and how I think making sure we respect that and understand that is part of the future of Northern Ireland. But I do think one of the things we have been doing, and we will continue to do, and I'm always keen to do as much as possible for myself. I know Robin Walker, our Minister of State, and others across government departments and across the EU as well, is about how we engage with people. So we have a continual engagement process with Northern Ireland businesses. We have a continual engagement with civic society in Northern Ireland. It's really important. Somebody raised the point on the floor of the House yesterday. Actually, it may have been Claire Hanna, actually, I think, but apologies if I'm wrong on that, around things like from the Good Friday Agreement, actually, civic forums and things like that. I think that is a really good thing, because it gives us more of a chance. I think sometimes it can be tempting to try and do things at quite a high level. I think actually, if we want to make sure as many people as possible are aware of, understand, are able to engage with the process, we need to go out and do that engagement and connect with people. So it's one of the reasons I was so keen that the EU engaged, because I do think there has been an issue. And it was very clear to me after the EU tried to or looked at engaging Article 16 back in January, it was very clear to me in the early conversations after that there are people in the EU and the Commission who simply do not understand why or how that affects the sensibilities and the sense and feeling that people have around identity, particularly in the loyalist community in Northern Ireland, and understandably so, actually. So I think it is important we encourage that kind of engagement so more people can understand on both sides. And you're right, Mr. Chairman, as we go forward and engage and can explain to people what is happening, why it's happening, what the point of it is, and hopefully conceive the change and benefit. If we can resolve these issues with the EU and have a situation where consumers and businesses are not detrimentally affected, and people's everyday lives can continue as they did in 2019 and 2020, for example, COVID aside, obviously, then I think we're in the right space for people to see that this is something that can work for everybody. We're not in that place at the moment, but that is something where we need to get to, and it's engagement, absolutely, that I think can play a large part in that, so that people themselves can then say, this works, and I'm prepared to say this works and tell my friends and family that as well.
Thank you. Claire Hanna.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'm aware Stephen Farry is going to come in maybe on an issue in SPS, and I'll come in after him on that. But thank you very much, Secretary of State. And I know you've spoken about the need to reassure people about constitutional status, and I think most of us are very alive to that. But the Chair referred to language and messaging at a rally about Irish ministers not being welcome in Northern Ireland. And we heard a vox pop on Sky News last week about a woman saying that she was willing to give her life to stop the protocol. Are you worried about radicalisation on this issue?
I think we should all be worried about any form of opportunity for radicalisation on this or any issue. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's why it's important that we are all very clear about what the purpose is, what the reason was for the protocol, the language we use with a small L, obviously, in terms of not creating a perception that moves way beyond reality. It is a reality that the problem at the moment, there is a problem with the protocol, and it is not working for the people and businesses in Northern Ireland. We absolutely need to correct that. I don't personally think it's right or productive to be saying that ministers from other countries and other parts are unwelcome in any place. My view is Northern Ireland is stronger because of its relationships internationally. As I say, the US and obviously our partners and friends in the Irish government are always welcome. And I have to say, if we look over the last, well, actually just in the last few days, I think I saw it's a Taoiseach in the Republic of Ireland who has actually been making the point that he wants to see a pragmatic and flexible approach from the EU to see a sensible resolution. And to be fair, he was very vocal and very strong on that very point back in January when the EU went to try and trigger Article 16, and I think it was very sensible and helpful in that regard at that point.
If given some of the things that we are seeing at rallies and some of the commentary in the media, if, say, radical Islamist groups or if the far right in your region were saying things like this on the media repeatedly, would you not be referring them to prevent the UK government's de-radicalisation programme?
But I think we also need to remember,
which I think, Minister, you had responsibility for at the Home Office, didn't you? Once upon a time.
Yes, I did for a while. Yes, yes. I think we also need to be very alert to the fact that issues around the protocol, issues around leaving the European Union more generally, I think sometimes we can all be at risk of putting them into a category of politics. We talk about the centre, the right, and the left of politics. I think one of the things we should have all learned by now with leaving the EU is it's not a matter of somebody being right-wing or left-wing, because we've got Labour members of Parliament, those with very strong left-wing views who are very pro leaving the EU. It is not a matter of left and right. It's a matter of people's strength of feeling about the sovereignty of the United Kingdom and taking that global approach rather than being part of the EU. So I'm afraid I don't see leaving the EU and the protocol anything in the context of left and right. And I think it's a mistake to do that because it's, I think, to be frank, inaccurate.
I don't either, Secretary of State, but we have groups saying essentially it's the protocol or peace. And I'm arguing that if a group was saying, for example, that it's racial equality or peace, then I think authorities would act. I think there's a level of tolerance that has been breached here. If you have groups like Extinction Rebellion, which are classed as extremist ideologies, and we have spokespeople for groups on the media day after day after day talking about potential violence. And as I say, a Vox Pop indicated that somebody would be prepared to give their life. But as we know in the history of this place, it wouldn't be her life. It would be the life of some young teenagers that would probably be given. So I'm suggesting that the standards for referral to de-radicalisation programmes appear to be a lot higher in Britain, or that this very, very serious threat is being ignored or tolerated. Just looking at solutions, I asked Lord Frost last week about using Article 14 of the protocol, which allows for representations jointly from the executive parties, and I suggested that might be a way to de-escalate and de-sectarianise some of the issues here. And picking up yesterday on a comment in the chamber from the member for East Belfast, where he indicated his belief that if all five parties went to the UK government and said that we believed that an SPS arrangement would go a substantial way to easing the difficulties, that he believed your government would agree with that. If that's the case, if the vast majority of parties here and therefore of the views of the electorate were that an SPS arrangement would be assistive in restoring balance and a sense of cohesion in Northern Ireland, given that protecting the Good Friday Agreement is a core part of your agenda, would you view that favourably, and would you advocate to the Prime Minister to pursue that course?
Well, look, I think if all five parties coming together in Northern Ireland and contributing to the debate and the discussion and feeding into Lord Frost's team, I'm sure Lord Frost would see as a positive thing. We have been engaging, as some of you know, with the parties in Northern Ireland, particularly obviously consistently with the First and Deputy First Minister, have been part of discussions. I have to say there's not yet been, from my memory, in any of those discussions, a joint position between even the FM and DFM around solutions. But as I say, we're always open to people coming forward with proposals. Look, the SPS dynamic alignment options that the EU have put forward is not something that we would accept, but we have proposed some very flexible solutions on a range of areas: pet travel, chilled meats, and yes, that does include sausages, customs processes, all of which would avoid the burdens that we know could further destabilise things and cause problems for businesses. And we've had no reciprocity yet from the EU. So in fact, we've been seeing their briefings escalate. So I think what we need to see is that engagement with the EU. We're keen to continue engagement with the executive, as I say, the executive, particularly the offices of the FM, DFM, but also other ministers through the Department of Agriculture and Economy at different meetings are involved in this process. So I think any engagement there is a positive thing and a good thing. But at the moment, as I say, Lord Frost team, I know are waiting to hear back from the EU in a constructive way around the proposals we have made that we believe can resolve these issues and importantly, yes, protect the Good Friday Belfast Agreement.
I think that's an important point for all of the parties, that if there is agreement on that you would view it favourably. Thank you very much, Secretary of State.
Thank you, Claire. Stephen, a couple of quick ones from you, Stephen Farry,
Yes,
and then whilst I know we could spend all morning and after lunch discussing the protocol, we're going to move to a different topic. So,
yes,
Stephen, you have the
thank you, Chair,
last word.
No doubt we'll come back to the protocol on another occasion too.
Sure, we will.
I just wanted to ask the Secretary of State. There is a very broad spectrum of messages coming from the government in relation to the protocol. At times, you talk about the protocol is not sustainable in its current form. Other times, you talk about trying to fix the problems. On other occasions, you can talk about what are in effect supplemental agreements with the European Union that could potentially override some aspects of the protocol. So, first of all, do you see some dangers and drawbacks from that very, very wide spectrum of messaging in terms of how that feeds into how people in the community in Northern Ireland respond and react to the situation, as opposed to maybe explaining to people this is the very narrow parameters in which we're operating? And maybe just as a second question, a lot of the current debate, perhaps for slightly understandable reasons, is framed through the needs and perceptions of political unionism. But you also recognise that at the same time, the majority of people in Northern Ireland are more pragmatic around the protocol, and in particular businesses are pragmatic, and they're not really talking about scrapping or replacing or protocol being unsustainable. They're looking for some form of practical solutions to problems, and indeed they want a form of stability. And in a sense where if we end up with more unilateral action from the government, that perhaps adds to the instability and uncertainty that businesses are facing.
Okay, yeah, I mean, there's a fair few things in there, Mr. But I actually think, coming to the first part of the two questions, if you like, I think those things actually are complementary, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So I think in the context of where we are, I think it is logical and correct to say that the protocol is not sustainable in the way the EU is currently envisaging it being delivered. It's not sustainable because people are not accepting of it. There is ultimately a consent mechanism built in, which, as I say, if we want to see it survive that, it's got to be sustainable. So I think in a very real sense that's the case. That's why we want to get these problems corrected and to see the protocol for Northern Ireland working in a way that, whilst we understand and want to respect the single market of the EU, which is their focus, obviously we want to make sure that it's delivered on the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the prosperity of people in Northern Ireland and respecting the internal integral market of the United Kingdom. That's why we need to see some changes in the EU. That's why we're doing this work. And our Frost team are doing this work on this dozen or more papers that we put into the EU, and we need to see some response to that. I think it is also fair to say, and actually some of the civic society made this point in the last meeting over Mount Sheffridge, that it is important that we can show that politics works, that it's responding to the concerns people have raised, that it means that the EU is working with us to ease these challenges and burdens in Northern Ireland, and that it's not prioritising the single market at all costs without any due regard to the unique circumstances, as we always refer to it in Northern Ireland, the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. I do think you're correct as well, Mr. Farry, in the sense of, yes, there is a lot of focus in the public discussion, the media discussion around this, around the impact and the response from people in the unionist community. And there is an added issue for people in the unionist community that has particularly shifted, I think, in terms of strength and irritation and frustration after the EU tried to trigger Article 16 back in January. The reality is they did do that. I appreciate they realised it was a mistake, stepped back quickly and apologised, but they did it. And that had an impact. And this impact we are still dealing with and seeing in the community today. And that sense of identity is real. But, and this is a really important but, I think comes to your point, from a slightly different angle, but the same point you're making, this is not just about the unionist community. This is about the community of Northern Ireland. Regardless of anybody's constitutional or religious views or anything else, if you are a consumer or a business in Northern Ireland at the moment, you are potentially detrimentally affected by the Northern Ireland Protocol. And with very limited exceptions, and I accept there are some, but it is very, very limited, pretty much every single business or business representation group we have engaged with has had issues with the protocol that they want to see resolved. We do not get people saying leave it as is. And I have to say, including in that, are politicians from both the DFM and the FM's office. And the DFM herself was very clear with Mal Shefkovich early on, and even now is clear there are issues with the protocol in meetings I've been in that need to be resolved. So I think across the board, we need to be clear with the EU. This is an issue for Northern Ireland. Yes, there is an additional issue for those in the unionist community around that sense of identity, but the challenges for businesses, and I would argue some of the businesses that are most eloquent of this are businesses who have a different constitutional view to me, arguably, are very clear this is an issue. It is affecting the way they do business, it's affecting their ability to do business, and for consumers, if you can't get access to a product you're used to having access to, that is an impact that shouldn't be there. It's disrupting the everyday lives of communities, and it's not based on a constitutional view. So I think this is something we need to resolve widely. I do also agree the majority of people want to see a pragmatic, flexible way forward on this. That's certainly where we are and what we're trying to secure with our partners in the EU. So it's a very long answer, but hopefully I've covered all those points.
That was helpful. Two very quick questions, please, on New Decade, New Approach. First, is it the government's plan that the bill that you introduced yesterday for second reading will have concluded all of its stages before we rise for the summer?
Sorry, on the bill that had second reading yesterday?
Yes.
Yeah, so I lost the sound there for a fraction of a second. That will not complete its passage through the Parliament by the summer recess. I wouldn't expect it to, no.
Okay, thank you. When do you expect it to?
Well, ultimately, that is a matter for business managers, but it will go through committee in the House of Commons. Obviously, then it goes to the House of Lords. I'm not going to pretend that I can control or have any idea exactly how long that would take. But the intention with the bill, the timing of this bill coming forward now was always based around it being in place and having royal assent before the May 22 Stormont elections. I would expect this to have royal assent this year, but that is really a matter for the business managers and the processes through both houses. And I'm afraid that's not entirely right.
That's fine. Thank you. I appreciate that. Can you just say a word or two, please, about what your initial assessment is of the workings of the Independent Fiscal Council?
Yes, so the formation of the Fiscal Council was announced on the 12th of March, which is a really good thing. They've got Sir Robert Cho appointed as chairperson. It's been talking to a range of stakeholders, from my understanding, is to get their assessments of the strengths and weaknesses of the public finance management, the reporting and scrutiny of that in Northern Ireland, which I think is important. And it's been gathering views, I think, quite widely, actually, around how best to meet the requirements set out in NDNA and the broader mission to bring greater transparency and independent scrutiny to the region's public finances. I look forward to seeing the final terms of reference, which I haven't done yet, but I do look forward to seeing those final terms of reference later this year when Sir Robert has completed that scope of work that he started to do.
Okay, thank you. Let's turn to legacy now. I think Mr. Pacey is going to open in the question on legacy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a meeting earlier in the week, Secretary of State, with the legacy champion, Danny Kinahan, and he expressed to me concerns that he thought, once again, let me put it, not his terms, but my terms, the dead hand of the NIO was being seen again on this legacy issue. And I wonder if you could give us a firm date as to when you expect to bring forward legacy legislation, or is this going to face interminable delays?
Secretary of State?
Sure. Yeah, look, I think I can't give you a firm date because obviously, ultimately, dates for introducing legislation are not decided by departments. But I stand by what I said yesterday, which is I still want to have something before Parliament, before we finish for the summer recess. But also, I've got to be very clear. I think whether it's your phraseology or the Veterans Commissioner, it is inaccurate to frame the role of the NIO in that way. Look, this is a very, as you know, Mr. Space, the committee members know, it's a hugely complex issue. It is an issue that has been faced for several decades now, arguably. If this was a simple issue to deal with, we wouldn't be talking about it. Our predecessors would have dealt with this by now. We've got to make sure that we take forward a piece of work that not just goes to Parliament, but actually delivers to the people of Northern Ireland, and genuinely is able to deliver on an ability to see reconciliation, information recovery. I personally think there's some really important work to do around the oral histories, which I know is part of Stormont House. I think the ability for people to tell their story and see their story told, I think, is hugely important. And yes, obviously, we're very clear, and we are still, as I said yesterday on the floor of the House, we will deliver on our pledge to veterans to end that cycle of investigations, which is not serving anybody. And I think we've seen a number of examples in just the last couple of months that highlight that the current system is not working for everybody. But we've got to make sure that when we bring this forward, we do so in a way that works, that delivers on those key focuses for victims particularly, for the future of Northern Ireland, and is one that the parties in Northern Ireland, the victims groups in Northern Ireland are engaged with and supportive of, and that's the work that we'll be doing in the weeks ahead. And obviously we want to be working with our partners in the Irish government as well.
Yeah, one of the stakeholders that it doesn't appear to be working for, Secretary of State, are of course veterans, about 300,000 of them, so they're a significant stakeholder. Now, I'm trying to get myself into the space where the government is, because when I speak to the Secretary of State for Defence and when I speak to others, I'm left with the opinion that the government view is that the Stormont House Agreement is actually dead, and that that's a fact of life, not because of any desire on their part to kill it off, but because it has now got zero traction and it is so old, and that therefore fresh thinking is required. Now, some people are, of course, clinging to the title of Stormont House Agreement as some sort of totem that it's the only way forward, but that the fact of life from where the government is that it is zero traction and it is therefore dead. So on the military aspect of dealing with cases that are complex and which have caused controversy, does the government intend to publish a statute of limitations anytime soon, and if so, before the summer recess also?
Well, look, just firstly to the first part of that comment, yes, obviously we do and are engaging with veterans groups as well. Widely, we've been engaging with them, including last week as well, actually, where the Veterans Minister and Robin Walker had a series of engagements in Northern Ireland, but also I myself have been engaging with veterans representatives as well, both here in mainland Great Britain and in Northern Ireland, and continue to work and obviously engage with the Veterans Commission itself. So yes, they are absolutely, because there are a large number of veterans, and Colonel Stewart himself will be more alert to this than pretty much any of us, but veterans as well are victims as well. You know, they have lost friends and colleagues through the Troubles as well. So they are equally an important part of the stakeholder group that we've got to make sure we are working with and representing, and their voices properly heard. And as I say, we will deliver, and we are absolutely clear, we will deliver on that pledge that we have made. But in terms of Stormont House, as I've said before a number of times, you know, Stormont House was 2014. If it was deliverable in the format it was discussed around in 2014, it would have been done by now. It's not true to say that all parties agree with all of Stormont House. As we all know, there are some who didn't agree with it at the time. But I think, quite importantly, there are also lessons that we have to learn. We've seen things have changed.
I lost you for a slight minute there. Could you just repeat that? It's not true to say.
I was saying it's not true to say, and some people make the case that all parties agree with Stormont House. That actually is not the case. There were political parties and others at the time were not entirely in agreement with Stormont House. But I think more importantly, we are 7 years on, and things have changed. You know, we've learned things since then. If we don't take the learnings of what we've seen through things, you know, the experience of Operation Canova, we've seen cases in the last couple of months and others that we've all spoken about before, that have highlighted the current situation isn't working. I do think, personally, and I've said this before, and the government's position is that the principles of Stormont House are good. There's a lot in Stormont House we want to deliver. What we've got to look at is how we do that and take things forward in a way that can actually be delivered. So we're not talking about this again as a concept in 5 years' time, or indeed even next year. But by next year, this is already happening and in action. And we've got to be practical about that, realistic about that. And as I say, I'm still determined and very ambitious to deliver something for parliamentarians before we break for summer recess.
The Northern Ireland Human Rights Watch, which is a pressure group that looks in particular at abuses around this area, has brought to my attention a number of cases where the border has come into play. And indeed, we've received evidence that there's several hundred cases where the Republic of Ireland has a significant role in terms of the truth recovery aspect. But isn't it the case that there's no truth recovery process available in the Republic of Ireland for anyone here who's been a victim of that to avail of? And yet there's hundreds of cases where the border has been used and where there are records and activities and knowledge in the Republic of Ireland that we can't get our hands on. What steps can you take in a new process to get the Republic of Ireland's government to face up to opening its records?
Well, look, I know the previous First Minister, I think, has herself raised some issues with the Irish government around cases in Northern Ireland. From a practical point of view, if there are cases that people want the Irish government to pick up or feel that they're not taking forward, I'm very happy to myself bring that to the attention of the Irish government. Obviously, I've got an opportunity to do that at the BIIGC tomorrow, but obviously we're in continuing engagement, so I have to do that. But I think, look, in terms of moving forward, in the wider sense, that's one of the reasons why it is important that we are. So I missed that. I think it's one of the reasons why it is important that we are working with and engaging with the Irish government around the plans going forward, because obviously this is something where the Irish government have a role to play, and I think it is important that we are working together to find a solution that can be delivered across both the UK and in Ireland, and that's why I want to make sure we are properly engaging with them on that as well.
Thank you, Secretary. So just I did let you away with an answer on when you intended to publish the statute of limitations. Have you any idea on that?
Well, actually, I'm sorry, that was the answer I gave in terms of I'm still very keen and determined to put something before parliamentarians before the summer recess.
Okay. Bob Stewart.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the Secretary of State's comments suit me. I will withdraw my question, which was largely asked.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Secretary, can I just ask you, I think it would be enormously helpful if you haven't given consideration to this, but when your proposals come forward, would you be prepared to publish or at least provide this committee with a list of those groups and organisations, individuals with whom you have consulted over your proposals as they come forward?
In principle, yes. The caveat I would put to that is some individuals will not necessarily, there will be some security issues to some individuals.
Yes, no, I accept that. Within the parameters of
parameters of the people we are talking to, winning to, but I would probably have to put the caveat in that there's obviously a wider range of people that we can't list individually. But that's something I'll pick up. Mark Larmour's on with us, so we'll pick something up.
Great, cool.
We'll put something together for you. Yes.
Thanks very much indeed. Claire Hannah.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on that, Secretary of State, are there any groups engaging with victims and survivors or political parties who've expressed support for the proposals as they currently stand from your government?
Well, as I say, we're in engagement with people now. I'm looking to have engagement over the next few weeks, so that's something I'll talk about a bit more when we're able to come forward with proposals. And that's why, as I'm saying, we want to come forward. I want to put proposals forward before Parliament finishes the summer recess. But I'm going to wait until I commented on what that is and the structure which we've come to that until we've actually finished those discussions and progress things further with a range of partners and parties.
Okay, well, that detail notwithstanding, would it be fair to say that if there isn't support from those groups or the political parties here or Dublin or Washington, that you couldn't credibly say that the proposals would aid reconciliation?
Well, as I say, I've said this before, I think reconciliation, first of all, this is a hugely complex issue. And one of the things that is true to say is pretty much everybody you speak to has a slightly different view and ideas around this. That's understandable because people come with different experiences and perceptions, quite rightly and quite understandably. It's why part of the challenge and the job for us is to bring that together in a way that we can then deliver something that works, always accepting that people will have different views around anything, something as complex and sensitive as this. But in terms of reconciliation, I am actually very focused. I think the reconciliation part is hugely important, but I think reconciliation in the wider sense as well. And I think one of the things, as an example of that we need to do much more on, all of us together, and again, this was raised on the floor of the House yesterday, is, for example, things like integrated education. If we want to reconcile society, we've got to make sure that society is properly integrating and coming together. And when you have a situation we do at the moment where far too often those of us who are working in Northern Ireland can talk to people who have first met somebody from a different religion and constitutional background, if you like, at the time they go to either work or university, that is not going to be driving reconciliation of a community in the long run. So we've got to look at reconciliation in quite a wide and an ambitious way, I think.
There's no doubt about that, but I suppose we can do both. We can do present day reconciliation, and we can also aim for legacy proposals that aid reconciliations as well. I just wanted to ask briefly about your intentions around civil actions on inquest. If the door is going to be closed on criminal investigations and prosecutions, do you intend to try and do the same on inquests and civil actions?
But as I say, I'm aiming, and as I say, I'm still focused on bringing a proposal for parliamentarians before we finish the summer recess. And I have committed to this committee before, and I will stick by that when we do that, I'm very happy to come and give a specific, have a specific session on those proposals. So it's probably better to discuss with the proposals in front of us, and I can talk to you about exactly what we are proposing and what the feedback is that has led to those decisions in terms of policy.
One tiny one on engagement. Have you spoken to the Lord Chief Justice just on the basis of his fairly exhaustive work on inquests to date?
We are talking to a wide range, and as I say, I'm not going to get into the details because everybody individually is not fair on them until we get to the point. But I'm very clear we're talking to a very wide range of people, so I'm confident that we are covering the whole breadth of interests and experience and views on this issue. I'm always happy to hear from more people, and if anybody on the committee has got suggestions you think of people we may not have got to, or organisations, very happy to make sure we do that in the weeks ahead. And as I say, I will go into detail about some of those conversations in terms of who and what, exactly as the Chairman outlined at the appropriate point as we move forward.
Thank you, Chair.
Just before I turn to Stephen Farry, Secretary of State, on this, we're all realistic enough to know there's a huge amount of stuff on your plate at the moment. But if you are in a position to bring forward or at least publish the direction of travel and proposals, could I urge you on behalf of the committee to commit to making a statement, an oral statement in the House, rather than just a written ministerial statement?
That is a very fair request. I will have a look at that. I'm not going to say yes or no, because again, that's not entirely in my control. But I
appreciate that.
I don't have a problem with that in principle, and I will look at whether we can do something like that at the right time. At the very least, if that's the appropriate thing to do, yes.
Thank you. I mean, I'm sure otherwise there would certainly be an application for an urgent question to the Speaker. So
I have no doubt.
Now, whether we'll be successful or not, I'm not sure. Mr. Farry.
Yeah, thank you. Just picking up on the question of consultation, I'm not quite sure who you have been talking to, but at least in public, all 5 executive parties have expressed reservations around what may be coming down the tracks. And virtually every major victims group across the spectrum in Northern Ireland has expressed concerns about what may be coming. And indeed, the greater body of academics and human rights groups have also expressed deep concern. Obviously, Stormont House was agreed at the time by the 2 governments and many of the political parties. But are we potentially, Secretary of State, looking at a situation where the government may end up imposing a legacy solution as such over the heads of virtually every stakeholder in Northern Ireland? And how could this be viewed as legitimate in that context?
Well, I think we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves in a sense there, Mr. Farry, in the sense that we've not yet put forward our proposals. I appreciate everybody has views around what they've seen in the press. I'm very clear we would like, and my focus is on working with stakeholders, although I appreciate that's a bit of a management term, but parties and victims groups and veteran society, all interested parties and, as I say, I can't think of a better word, I'm afraid, stakeholders across Northern Ireland and beyond, because obviously it's not just people in Northern Ireland, there are people beyond Northern Ireland, who have an interest in this as well. So when we come forward with a proposal, I can be very clear it's something that I think is deliverable. But again, I come back to the point you mentioned, Stormont House. If Stormont House was deliverable in the format it was discussed in 2014, we wouldn't be talking about it in 2021. It would have already happened. I think we need to be cognizant of that. And there are lessons to learn over the last 7 years, as I say, not least of all from the excellent work done by Operation Canova, actually, is a good indicator in what we've seen through some of the cases recently. So I think it is right that we continue that work with people, and we'll come forward with some proposals in due course.
Of course.
And as I said before, I'm sure that you will be grilling me in depth around that and how we've come to those conclusions in a future committee meeting, which I will happily do.
Of course, Stormont House was referenced in New Decade, New Approach as the legacy system as recently as last year. Just finally, Secretary of State, could I just confirm that if we were to see an end to prosecutions in relation to veterans, any such measure will have to apply to all Troubles-related prosecutions, and that would also therefore cover IRA and loyalist terrorists, if that type of scenario was to unfold?
Well, I think the two parts to what you just said, Mr. Fair, in terms of NDNA, yes, you are correct. That's why, as I say, I'm very clear that actually what we want to deliver on, I think, delivers on the core principles of Stormont House. I think they are good. But as I say, particularly information recovery, reconciliation, oral histories is why. It's just looking at how in practice we can actually do something that is actually going to work. That means people get information, that we actually get that accountability, we get to the truth, we get reconciliation. And as I say, I'm personally very hugely committed to delivering a structure for an oral history that people really can see their story properly told. And I'm very clear that whatever we do in Northern Ireland, the reality is this was something set out in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, has to work across the whole community, and it applies right across, as it did in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. Secretary, we're going to stay on the subject of victims, but switch to Libya and Gaddafi. And I'm going to turn to Scott Benton to lead off on this section. Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Secretary of State, and thank you for joining us. William Shawcross said that more research might identify how everybody who deserves compensation can receive it. Do you think the government needs to do more research and work in this area? And if so, can you confirm whether or not that work has been undertaken so far, or at least has started to be undertaken?
Well, look, I mean, obviously, as you appreciate, this is an area that's led on by the Foreign Office. And I do want to say, first of all, again, as I know we all have the same view that we have huge sympathy for the UK victims of the Gaddafi-sponsored terrorist atrocities, and indeed, obviously, all victims of the Troubles. And in terms of the specific question, Mr. Benton, look, we're working hard. I think that the folks I know for the Foreign Office and wider UK government is working hard to support the UN efforts to stabilise things in Libya, and I think a more stable Libya is something that would be in a position to be better able to progress how we deal with the legacy of the Gaddafi regime in a wider sense, and that's the work that the UK government is doing.
Mr. Benton. Scott, you're muted.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary of State. The situation in Libya is clearly fluid at the moment, but in the absence of a government who is able to move ahead with this, what would you say to victims from whom this committee has heard, who've now been waiting 30 years to receive compensation and justice for their family members and loved ones? Are you content just to wait for the situation in Libya to play out until they can receive the compensation they deserve?
Oh, well, look, obviously, I mean, people have been through this. I, recognise the inexplainable pain and suffering that victims of violent crime have been through, including obviously the terrorist atrocities. But as I say, we've got planned Libyan elections, and following those elections, once Libya's sufficiently politically and economically stable, I know that we will be, as a government, re-engaging the elected authorities there in Libya on the issue of compensation for victims of the Gaddafi-sponsored terrorism atrocities. At the moment, as I say, the reality is we have no legal basis to seize frozen Libyan assets, or even to refuse the release of frozen assets once the conditions for delisting or unfreezing those assets as set out by the UN Security Council resolutions of 2009-11 are met. But as I say, we will be engaging those elected authorities on the issues as soon as we can.
Thank you. The Treasury benefits from around £5 million every single year in taxation accrued from those frozen Libyan assets. Of course, there's nothing whatsoever to stop the government from ring-fencing those monies specifically for victims of Gaddafi IRA terrorism. I'm sure that the £5 million pot wouldn't cover all of the compensation required, but it would be a politically expedient way for the government to demonstrate that we recognise how important this issue is and are willing to do something about it in lieu of the situation in Libya progressing. Is there any specific reason why the Cabinet or government won't move ahead and use that £5 million specifically for this purpose?
Well, as I say, in terms of the assets, obviously, as I say, there's no legal basis. And at the moment, I have to say, the government's position is we don't see that it would be in the wider UK national interest to make release of those assets conditional.
No, Secretary of State.
But I do get the point around.
Secretary of State. Secretary of State.
I do get the point around the interest point.
Secretary of State. Sorry to interrupt. Mr. Benton wasn't referring to the assets which are frozen.
I know.
But the taxation which is accrued by the Treasury, for which it would be perfectly legal to hypothecate, ring fence for purposes. That's a Treasury decision.
Yeah, I was going to say, I appreciate your talk about the different parts. You just confirmed that, Mr. Chairman. But as I say, it's something that the government will be talking to the elected bodies around in Libya as and when we have that stable and sustainable position. It's not our position at the moment to move further than that. As I say, I'm happy to engage with the Foreign Office and the Treasury around what you've outlined and come back to you if there is any different positions to that from the wider government's view at the moment.
Thank you, Secretary of State. And this is a point in terms of that £5 million. This committee has pressed James Cleverly on this a number of occasions, and I suspect will continue to do so, because certainly from my point of view, I don't think we've received an adequate explanation as to why we can't utilise that £5 million. But just moving beyond that argument somewhat and going back to the discussions with the Libyan government, hypothetically, do you think there is a political and moral argument but only consenting to releasing those Libyan frozen assets at the UN if there is compensation in return for UK victims?
But look, I'm afraid that's not something I think I can answer. That's something you need to put to the Foreign Office ministers. But as I say, at the moment, our position is, as I've already outlined, and there is no change to that position.
Okay, thank you, Secretary of State. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Scott. When the Foreign Office, Secretary of State, released its written ministerial statement, had they consulted you on it?
Well, yes, we saw the written ministerial statement, yes.
No, you saw it, yeah. But were you consulted on it pre-publication?
I think we were, but I'd have to double check and come back to you on that.
Okay, because we heard from Mr. Shawcross, and indeed it was in the WMS, some concern, which frankly, I don't think any of us on the committee recognise as a likely scenario of some sort of compensation envy, that somebody might receive a package of compensation because of Libya, and that might lead to their neighbour, who was a victim of a terrorist attack, but nothing to do with Libyan-sponsored activity, being sort of very miffed and angry, and this would lead to all sorts of community tensions. Now, none of us across the parties that serve on this committee recognise that as a scenario. None of the victims that we've spoken to recognise that as a scenario or likelihood. Where in the name of all that is holy did the Foreign Office scrape up that flimsy excuse for inaction?
Well, I don't recognise that point. And obviously,
it's in the WMS.
Well, in Northern Ireland, obviously, we've got the victims' payment scheme, which opens in August for victims. So So I think that will progress, and as I say, the Justice Minister announced, I think just a couple of days ago, that that's going to open. The Lord President's ready to open that at the end of August. So that side of things will continue to progress and be delivered on.
And you mentioned the government has huge sympathy, which we've heard for decades now. And to quote the old phrase, sympathy butters no parsnips. What is the government actually doing? Because it does seem, well, we're just going to wait. It all seems rather supine. The government is going to wait to see what happens in Libya. It can't even have a political conversation at the United Nations of some sort of quid pro quo. We're the pen holder for Libya. We're in a strong position. The government's position just seems to be very relaxed, laid back, reactive to events rather than trying to shape them. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, I think actually, to be fair to I think the team and the finance are always trying to shape things and move things forward. Obviously, you've got to make sure you're doing that in the right context. What I think is important, they do that when they've got that stable government and authorities in Libya. But the reality is, Libya is in as you I think you used the phrase earlier, it's been in a state of flux and a very delicate position for some time. But I think the Foreign Office, it's one of the things the Foreign Office are very alert to and will want to continue to move forward. Obviously, this is a Foreign Office
I take that. I take that.
In front of you, but I do think the Foreign Office is always working on these issues, whatever they are, globally around the world, to move forward positively with the interests of UK citizens.
Okay, I mean, you'll be aware that the Foreign Office set up effectively a sort of Libyan support group or little unit within the FCO. We've taken evidence that effectively the government has said victims must paddle their own canoe in trying to secure compensation directly from Libya. And when a group of victims had booked in to go to Tripoli to talk to people, they asked the Foreign Office to provide an interpreter. Fairly basic request, I would have thought, for our consular service. And the Foreign Office said no. So even when victims are trying to sort out their own problems at the urging of the government isn't even providing the most minimum of help of a translator or indeed any form of logistics help in terms of transport organisations. We appreciate, Secretary of State, this is not in your purview, this is the Foreign Office, but could we ask you to engage directly with both the Foreign Secretary and the Minister of State for North Africa and the Middle East to bring to their attention in clear and stark terms the seriousness with which everybody in Northern Ireland views this issue?
Yes, very happy to take that forward, absolutely.
Thank you. Let us now turn to the very exciting topic of GDPR, Law Enforcement Directive, and data adequacy. And who better to bring that topic to life than Mr. Stephen Farry?
Thank you, Chair. Finish off there. I just wanted to check as to where we are with data adequacy. Secretary of State, as you appreciate, it is of fundamental importance to, in particular, law enforcement in Northern Ireland, but also to the wider business community as well. And appreciate that we're on a 6-month sort of interim period with the European Union in that regard. So is this something that we're likely to get a clear solution on in the very near future?
Look, yeah, very fair. Look, I would just take an opportunity to make the point. I think the relationship and the working between PSNI and the Garda has been absolutely superb. They've got very, very, very good working relationships. As I say, I think very impressive how they've continued to work together in a really positive way. And I had a very good meeting with the Justice Minister in the Republic of Ireland just a few weeks ago. In fact, I think I'll be seeing the Minister again as part of the BIIGC meetings tomorrow. The EU has recently set out some draft decisions on the adequacy of our data protection rules. Based on those, they would mean that data can keep flowing freely between the EU and the UK. Obviously, we welcome that. And at the moment, my point would be we would just urge the EU to adopt those decisions without, not only without any complications, but without any uncertainty and delay. So I think that's a positive thing, and hopefully that will rectify that situation pretty swiftly now.
You're glad to know that's one I definitely agree with you on.
There's always more that brings us together than divides us.
Absolutely.
I'm tempted to pause the meeting there and bank that one. Anything else, Stephen? Okay, thank you. Union connectivity review. I hand over to Mr. Goodwill.
Thank you very much indeed, and good morning, Secretary of State. I'd like to ask you about some of the outstanding transportation issues, and I think probably one issue which has been thrown into stark relief because of COVID is the lack of air connectivity. I know from my own regional airport, Leeds, I could usually fly to Belfast. Recently, when I was looking to fly for September, it looked like a connection in Southampton, London, or Aberdeen. Are you monitoring the situation with regards to air connectivity from regional airports? And if so, are there any steps that you could maybe take as things start to open up in the economy to try and kickstart air flights again?
Yes, actually, I've got some good news for you on that as well, in the sense that I happen to know from some personal research in the last 24 hours that there are now flights from Belfast into Leeds. British Airways have a flight, so there is the ability to do that now, because I've been looking at doing that very flight myself in the period ahead of us. Look, yes, I think obviously there's been a real challenge through COVID. We put in financial support for some of the air connectivity over the last year or so through the COVID. As we come out of that, yes, I think there is a real challenge around making sure that as we open up, as the economy opens up, we are encouraging those routes. I know both the Department for the Economy and all is hugely focused on this, and we will support them and work with them on that. And the airports themselves, I have to say, excellent management teams, particularly at in Marshall's dealing with Belfast City Airport and the Derry Londonderry airports, and really looking at how they can encourage and drive more of those regional flights that are so important for the connectivity of the whole UK. So yes, that's absolutely something we'll be looking at, supporting in appropriate ways and encouraging. But I think a lot of it is going to be driven obviously by consumers, and as we open up, people's desire to move around. And I would hope that we will see a lot of consumers across Great Britain who are looking to where they can spend their summer if they're not going to be doing flights to other countries, and they're not going to be doing long haul flights. There's a really good opportunity at home in the UK to come and see Northern Ireland's beauty, splendour and amazing hospitality, and jump on a short internal flight to do that.
Yeah, and indeed, people from Northern Ireland could get a short internal flight to Leeds and enjoy North Yorkshire as well. But can I ask you about
absolutely.
About land connectivity? Have you actually personally ever driven on the A75 from Carlisle to Stranraer or Cairn Ryan?
As it happens, I have once, some time ago. It was an experience.
Would you like to sort of enlarge upon that experience?
Well, obviously, even allowing for being within speed limits, it wasn't the fastest journey I've ever done from my memory, but it was a while ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, could I ask for some assurances that the upgrade that's been announced on that piece of tarmac will go ahead? Because there are other transport projects I know that you're looking at, but that's something that's within grasp and within a timescale that we could probably see in our lifetimes.
I would take that as noted and understood.
Right, and I suppose finally turning to the elephant in the room, or dare I say the white elephant in the room, is the prospect of a bridge or a tunnel still in play, and have you had discussion with the Transport Secretary about that? In particular, have any detailed cost-benefit analysis been done? And also, have you carried out any analysis, for example, of issues for high trailers on a bridge or dangerous goods in a tunnel?
Well, obviously, look, the connectivity review itself will make the recommendations around how we best improve connectivity. I think we've got to wait for Sir Peter's report, and recognise obviously the A75 is a hugely important route for freight as well. But we've had conversation with Sir Peter Hendy, myself as well. And I think it is important that we look at everything we can. I personally am very, very supportive of the concept of physical connectivity between Northern Ireland and mainland Great Britain. I can't prejudge what will come out of the report and the business plan work that may well follow that. But as I say, I think the principle of it is a good one. And it's not just good for the United Kingdom, it's actually good for the island of Ireland and therefore the Republic of Ireland as well, around getting that connectivity across all of our markets. And again, coming back to your opening question around air flight, one of the things we've seen through COVID actually is the challenges to movement for freight apart from anything else. When we saw the pressure on both ferries and air travel, means that physical connectivity would have made that less of a pressing issue, and I think would have been, reconfirmed the importance of trying to do something like that. So I think in the UK we do need generally to be more ambitious around large infrastructure projects that have a long-term benefit. And I think some of the things our forebearers did many, many years ago, Victorian and Edwardian times, that we are benefiting from today, we've got to be brave enough to make some of those decisions as well. Obviously, always being clear about the business case and good use of public money. But as I say, personally, I think the principle of structural connectivity between Northern Ireland and Great Britain is a very good thing.
Thank you. Finally, would you agree that the estimate of 20 billion for a bridge or tunnel, or indeed a combination bridge tunnel across the Irish Sea is a realistic estimate, or have you looked at ballpark figures?
I'm not going to start a quantity surveying career this late in my life. So I'm going to, I don't know what the final figures will be. I think we all need to wait and let Peter finish his report, look at what comes out of that, and then look at what is the right business case around what we do. As I say, as a matter of principle, I think this is a very, very good thing. It would be an important thing from an economic and prosperity point of view for the whole of the United Kingdom. As I say, I think also for the Republic of Ireland as well. And it's where one of the things I think we've been working on, and I know the Prime Minister's keen on working with the Taoiseach as well around the Shared Island Unit, is that work around infrastructure and connectivity across the whole of the island of Ireland, and for us across the whole of the UK.
Thank you very much indeed. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwill. I suppose I ought to just point out, Secretary of State, that Mr. Goodwill asked you to make a commitment of spending on roads from Carlisle within our lifetimes. Could I ask your actuaries to discount Miss Jones and Mr. Benton from that? because if we went on their lifetimes, you've got another 60 years to deliver it. I think much better to go on Mr. Goodwill's. Well, you've probably got about, I don't know, 3.5 months or something. Right, but let's turn to
Mr. Goodwill's looking good for a fair while to me at the moment.
Well, so. I think so. It's that it's that good Yorkshire air. That's what keeps him going. Can we turn to the free trade agreement, proposed free trade agreement between the United Kingdom and Australia? And we're going to turn to some questions from Faye Jones. Thank you. Faye.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Secretary of State. I know I'm being a bit of a cliche, being from Wales and a farming constituency, to ask about farming, but nevertheless, the Secretary of State for International Trade has announced an agreement with Australia, and I wondered if you could give us your assessment of the impact of that agreement on Northern Ireland farmers.
Sure. No, it's a very important point. I think the deal is a positive deal for Northern Ireland. It's Northern Ireland itself exported some 6 million worth of beverages to Australia in 2020 alone, even in a year obviously where we were all seeing structural changes and struggles through COVID. But this deal removes tariffs, for example, on beverages, so that makes it easier for products like Northern Ireland's wonderful whiskey to get to Australia. And I think one of the things that's a hugely important sector. But the deal also will support Northern Ireland's life sciences sector. Employs more than 5,000 people at the moment, and Northern Ireland exported some £13 million worth of medicinal pharmaceutical products to Australia, again, just in 2020 alone. So with a tariff cut of up to 5% for that, I think that's, as well as administrative red tape, that's a very, very good thing. I think it's also just worth us all bearing in mind that around 90% of all the goods that are exported from Northern Ireland to Australia are manufacturing and machinery-based goods. So many of those are used extensively, obviously, in mining, quarrying, recycling sectors. And indeed, I myself saw a company supply all the equipment for that. But a Northern Ireland company, actually, even in Derbyshire recently, with one of our colleagues. So these kind of things, these exports will have their tariffs removed. I think that is a big boost to exports potentially for Northern Ireland. So. But again, there'll also be procurement opportunities and some business mobility provisions, makes it easier for business travel between the UK and therefore Northern Ireland and Australia as well. So, as I say, I think there's some real opportunities there.
Okay, specifically on the, I'd like to understand how you think Australian goods will transfer into the Northern Ireland market under the auspices. I'm sorry, I can't say that with the cold and the laryngitis that I've got at the moment. Under the terms of the Northern Ireland Protocol, how do you see that playing out?
Sure, no, that's a fair point. And actually, I know you mentioned in your previous question, I didn't quite touch on. I want to just be clear. I think in terms of your point around farmers as well, I think this actually opens up potential opportunities. I don't think it undercuts businesses at all when you look at the structure of how the deal works and the structure of how the Australian market works. But in terms of protocol, I think so. We've been clear in our negotiations. The Northern Ireland will have access to these, reflecting the unique circumstance in Northern Ireland and the protocol. The protocol is also in itself very clear that Northern Ireland will be able to benefit from those trade deals. So I know that there's been concerns raised around the impact of protocol, but we're very clear that Northern Ireland will have access.
So you don't see any friction? I know the protocol is obviously currently being discussed and potentially being amended. You don't foresee any friction for Australian goods coming into Northern Ireland with an amended protocol?
I'm going to be honest. I mean, no, I don't. And you're right. Within the context, obviously, there are issues with the protocol more generally, and there is some friction being created by the protocol that we want to resolve between GB and NI anyway. That needs to be resolved. But within that context, but I'll bring in Colin Paris.
So I think it's been a principle of the way that we've been working within government and the free trade agreements have been discussed, that actually the protocol has to be within it. And so therefore we have engaged with the Department for International Trade to ensure that Northern Ireland can benefit from free trade agreements, whether it's with Australia or the other ones that the government has in prospect, to ensure that the benefits of free trade agreements go right across the UK and will include Northern Ireland as well.
Okay. I wanted to come back to the point around farming in particular. The deal does contain a number of safeguards, as the government would put it, to ensure that all UK farmers are not undercut by Australian farmers who are, by their very nature, able to farm on a much more expansive scale than we are in this country. And so I'm keen to understand the discussions that you have had with the Secretary of State for International Trade and other cabinet colleagues about how you might support farmers if there is a distortion of trade, if there is any flooding of the market. What support measures do you anticipate being put in place?
Well, I think if you look at the structure of the deal, there is, I mean, certainly obviously you've got a staging points to the deal. And I think if you look at the structure of the deal, there is no reason why farmers would be detrimentally affected in that way. I think particularly when you look, as I say, at the structure also of the Australian market, where their market is, where their value is, and actually the value we have here of UK produced products as well. I think we can all play a part in that. So I actually don't envisage that being a particular challenge. That Colin would want to add anything to that. But obviously, it's something we're always assessing the impacts of anything across the whole of the economy, both Department for Business and obviously the Department of the Economy in Northern Ireland, and we support them on that. And if we do see things across a range of areas, we'll always look at what we can do, where we can support. Obviously, ensure that we give the private sector the freedom and the space to be able to evolve and develop. But as I say, I just don't see a detrimental impact in that way. But Colin, is there? No.
Okay, and so more widely, this is the tip of the iceberg as far as the Secretary of State for International Trade is concerned. And indeed, the government has been very clear that it wants to reach a number of agreements around the world with New Zealand, with the United States, with other counterparts. What discussions have you had on other deals that may be in the pipeline?
Well, I'm not going to comment on internal discussions around trade deals. Obviously, trade deals and the negotiations are taken forward by the Department of International Trade. We work with them to ensure that Northern Ireland's voice is heard at the right times, the appropriate times. They've always engaged fully with us. And I have to say, the Department of International Trade have been very engaged in Northern Ireland. They're looking to open a hub in Northern Ireland. They've had virtual border trade meetings where we're all having to do something virtually with Northern Ireland. And we'll be hosting a border trade in Northern Ireland later this year. So Northern Ireland is very much on the radar for the Department of International Trade, and myself and the Secretary of State speak regularly.
I don't think I'm going to get any more out of you on that, Secretary of State. Thank you.
I think that's all I'm going to say on that. But we are always just talking and making sure that Northern Ireland's voice is well heard, as does the Department of Economy through the Northern Ireland Exec as well, to be fair.
Okay, thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. The Agriculture Minister at Stormont doesn't agree with you, does he?
On
these benefits to Northern Irish agriculture?
Oh, well, sorry, yes, I see what you mean. Look, yeah, I mean, the Agriculture Minister in Northern Ireland raised actually the very point that was just made here in the committee. But as I say, our assessment is, and I made this point to the Minister for Agriculture, that actually when you look at the structure of the deal as it's being formalised, as we move forward, I think it's one that can work for Northern Ireland. That's a huge, potentially overall benefit for the UK and I think for Northern Ireland. And actually it's one that I think farmers in Northern Ireland, as things develop, as we secure the deal, will see ultimately is not a threat to them. I think actually, as I say, in a wider sense, creates opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Campbell has had to go. He sends his apologies. He was going to ask about the centenary commemorations. Secretary of State, I will take up his question for him. What assessment have you made on the effect of the centenary celebrations on community cohesion, and what steps has the government taken to facilitate international awareness and understanding of the significance of the centenary?
Sure, yeah. I mean, look, from the start of the year, we've been working to develop and deliver an approach that's respectful and inclusive in tone. I think the historic advisory panel, the independent panel, have been hugely balanced and very, very helpful in that regard. And I think have done a superb job. It's been well credited, I think, across the board. Obviously, make sure we're focused on remembering the key dates across the year. And of course, just yesterday was the centenary of King George V's speech and his visit with Queen Mary. We've launched the Our Story in the Making brand. We took an extensive period of insight gathering to measure cross-community attitudes towards the centenary, how it should be marked. I want people to be able to, who wanted to be able to celebrate the centenary. I want to make sure we are celebrating Northern Ireland. I think, as I say, it's another opportunity to promote Northern Ireland around the world, as you say, that the second part of Mr. Campbell's question. We're working with the Foreign Office and other departments actually across UK government to just make sure that the centenary of Northern Ireland is not just acknowledged in the UK, but we are using it as an opportunity to promote and deliver Northern Ireland around the world. Obviously, the first part of this year, we've been somewhat restricted because of the COVID restrictions, which is why the programme is weighted towards the second part of the year. But there's still a huge amount of work going on with young people, particularly around with the schools across Northern Ireland, the tree planting programme, working across creative arts. As I say, there's a whole range of work that's been taken forward with some more events later in this year, as well as obviously the announcement we had recently around the Royal Hillsborough as well.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let's turn to Mr. Farry.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask a few questions around some funding issues. As the Secretary will appreciate, whenever we had access to European funding in Northern Ireland, those issues were largely controlled by the Northern Ireland Executive. And indeed, when I had direct responsibility for the European Social Fund at that stage. So just as a prelude to the wider Shared Prosperity Fund, we have the Levelling Up and the Community Renewal Fund. There is a lot of frustration in Northern Ireland at present that those are being delivered over the heads of the Northern Ireland Executive, which in theory does have the capacity, excuse me, on local knowledge and experience to deliver that type of funding project. So just maybe outline the rationales why those are being directly managed by the UK government over the heads of the Northern Ireland Executive?
Well, I'm not sure. This is one of those areas where we might even disagree, Mr. Farry. Actually, I wouldn't.
It was all going so well.
Well, we can always agree to disagree, but anyway, as I say, I wouldn't describe it in those terms. So obviously, as the European funding, those structural funds are going to we're going to be replaced by the UK SPF funds. The UK, instead of the EU, will be putting those funds out there. We've got the funds, as you say, quite rightly. You are correct, obviously, this year coming through the Department for Communities and Local Government, which are looking at, to an extent, it's also going to help us learn around how we can best implement the UK SPF funding. Where I disagree with you is, yes, this is UK direct government being able to spend directly, so we want to make sure we're able to deliver into organisations across communities. It's one of the things that I think actually does reflect the agreement in NDNA around UK government departments being more involved and having more of a presence in Northern Ireland. It is also obviously part of the UK Internal Market Bill decision that we would be able to deliver some of these things, so we can deliver those funds in that way. Where I disagree is I think this is being done, and we will be looking to work with the Northern Ireland Executive. I know that the Department of Communities and Local Government have already had some meetings with the Executive. We'll be looking to continue to engage, and I certainly would ensure that that does happen, so that we are working together. But I do think it is right that we're looking at how we can best and most efficiently ensure that organisations, local authorities, groups are able to access these funds to be able to move forward quickly and efficiently and effectively for people in Northern Ireland.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I mean, to date, we're talking probably double figure millions of pounds around the community renewal fund, but the much bigger issue is going to be what happens with the shared prosperity fund. And I appreciate the still decisions to come in this in terms of spending decisions later on this year. But the very particular difficulty there is that Northern Ireland received money under structural funds that was based upon objective need. So at times Northern Ireland received well in excess of its population share. But it seems that from various soundings that Northern Ireland will get a bar a consequential share of the shared prosperity fund spending, which potentially is going to leave major shortfalls in a whole range of spending areas around, for example, tourism, regeneration, investment in apprenticeships, disability employment, women's employment issues, a broad range of areas that have traditionally relied upon European funding. So the executive is potentially facing a shortfall of tens and tens of millions of pounds in areas where it normally was able to draw down European funding. So are you conscious of those huge concerns, both at the executive level, but more importantly at the area of the huge number of community and voluntary sector groups who have historically depended on such funding, which is potentially going to dry up and leave many people high and dry in terms of both services and jobs?
Well, we've been very clear. But look, in terms of the decisions around how the funding will be administered, you're quite right, those decisions have not been made yet. So it's premature to make early decisions around that. I also do recognise that organisations like to have certainty as early as possible. I do get the challenge around that. They can be confident, though, around the level of funding that we're looking at, because we've been very clear that the level of funding will be at the right level. So there's no reason why Northern Ireland would be seeing the sort of any substantial shortfall in terms of, as you outlined. But how this is structured, how this is delivered, you're correct. Those decisions have not yet been made. Very happy to feed in the comments you just made. There is obviously always, and even with the European structural funds, the reality is that people will be within that. There will be projects and organisations that are funded to do a particular piece of work. It is around that piece of work or that project or at that point in time in that round of funding. And every time there's a new round of funding coming through, obviously there can be change to that. People have to bid and look at. So there's always a risk for those organisations in that sense, even through the European Structural Fund itself. But as I say, the UK SPF Fund, the final decisions are not made yet. Very happy to continue to make the points, but I'm very clear that we want to ensure that Northern Ireland is getting the right amount of money to be able to deliver on the really good work that we've seen. And there is, I've been fortunate enough to see some phenomenal work on the ground by organisations in Northern Ireland that have benefited from those funds that we all want to see continue.
Well, Secretary of State, I would certainly very much welcome if you were an advocate for Northern Ireland at Cabinet around those very particular concerns around the level of funding that will come in to Northern Ireland. And just two very brief follow-ups, Chair, on the funding issue. Just first of all, can maybe just ask the Secretary of State's reflections on perhaps the slow pace of movement on the Belfast City region deal, which is hasn't had any projects formally signed off yet after 2 or 3 years. I think there's growing frustrations just in terms of the bureaucracy involved in terms of getting the city deal, issue moving in that respect. And then secondly, just as a corollary to that, we also have the Strengthening Places Fund, which I think is managed through BEIS. And there's a concern, particularly in terms of the UK research investment. There's a disproportionate focus on what you would term the research triangle between Oxford, Cambridge and London, and areas such as Northern Ireland, which have an excellent track record in science engineering, which you yourself have referred to many times, risk being marginalised in. So just in terms of both the city deal and also then Strengthening Places with BEIS.
Sure. No, I'm very happy to continue to make that point. In fact, the Prime Minister had a conversation when he was over in Northern Ireland last time, actually with Queen's University around the research and development and that very point. I'm very, very alert to that. And in terms of the Belfast City region deal, look, I recognise there's been some frustration. There was with the Derry and Strabane deal as well around some of those issues were at the executive level, but we've been able to get that away. And I'm still optimistic and focused on the full deal document for the Belfast City region deal being signed this autumn, so we can see that getting up and running. There was some really good work around that as well for city deals more generally. So, and the investment is substantial, very, very substantial. So I think it'll be good, and I think we should all focus on getting that done and dusted and signed this autumn.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Secretary of State, you'll know that we have many quaint customs across the United Kingdom, none more quainter than the threat to bring down the executive. It's sort of one of those sort of things which we seem to sort of almost have to put into our calendars. You know as well as I do, as well as everybody on this committee does, the enormous impact, negative impact that a 3-year interregnum on the quality of lives and the political and policy outcomes for people of Northern Ireland had when Stormont didn't sit for 3 years. As Secretary of State today, what is your message to the party leaders, to their supporters, and to others about a threat to bring down the executive?
Look, my position on this has been pretty consistent for a very long time now, which is my point to anybody making that is I don't think the public of Northern Ireland will thank you or forgive you for that. I think the public of Northern Ireland after that, as you rightly say, Chairman, after the impasse of 3 years, want to see the executive up and running, particularly at a time of a pandemic. And we are still dealing with a pandemic, and we'll be dealing with that pandemic for some time yet in terms of the recovery from it and how we move out of it as well. So I think the public want to see all the political parties in Northern Ireland doing as they've done for the bulk of the last year and a half, actually superbly well, especially considering how shortly after the formation of the executive, COVID came upon us, working together for the best interest of Northern Ireland. And obviously with 5 parties, there'll be times, quite regularly, no doubt, where they will disagree on things, but ultimately what we've seen through the pandemic is the ability to ultimately get decisions made for the benefit of people in Northern Ireland. And I think that's what people want to see. They want to see the exec up and running. And I think there will be very low levels of tolerance for people if they believe people are going out of their way to take Stormont away as the Northern Ireland Executive and Assembly for people.
Thank you. And Secretary, in bringing our proceedings to a close, it seems that every day is a named day for something at this time. You'll probably know, but if not, I'll fill in your information gap, that today, I'm told, is National Let It Go Day. Now, I didn't know it was this, but you shamelessly plug Great Yarmouth. I'm now going to shamelessly plug in closing remarks a tweet from Dorset Council, which is the local government area that covers my constituency of North Dorset, and it opines on this fact of National Let It Go Day, and it says in a tweet, "It's the perfect occasion to stop wasting so much energy on negative feelings from the past and instead focus on building a brighter, and more positive future. I think if we all took that as a firm advice from Dorset Council to everybody involved in the public affairs of Northern Ireland, that wouldn't be a bad motto, would it?
No, I agree, and I would actually say it fits very nicely with, I would suggest, if people go on the ourstoryinthemaking.com around the centenary, they will be able to see the details of the speech that George V gave 100 years ago. And I think the content that was in that speech, as I said on a video the other day, is as relevant today as it was 100 years ago. And it mirrors very much the sentiment behind the quote you just gave. Let's work together and move things forward in a positive way.
Thank you. Secretary of State, on behalf of the whole of the committee, thank you for your attendance this morning. Thank you for taking a wide range of questions. We will probably see you, if not before, on the floor of the House with regards to legacy announcements, hopefully before summer recess. But otherwise, we will see you in the autumn. Difficult times, we know, challenging times for you and indeed for Robin as your Minister of State. And I hope that you know that you have the sort of affection and support and energy of this committee in what you are trying to do, as we all are, which is trying to deliver a better quality of life for all of those who live in Northern Ireland. So thank you again for your attendance this morning. Order.
My pleasure. Thank you.